Welcome back. Jasmine Terry again, and today I'm here with Ashley Mae Wasser, who just finished a very informative speech about Georgia's new concealed carry law, House Bill 89. Now Ashley, this speech is the second in our series, informative speech, and I want to just talk a little bit about how you prepared, the preparation process that went into creating this well thought out, well articulated informative speech. So first, tell me a little bit about what were you thinking about when you were going into this informative speech process?
I knew not to be too opinionated about the speech. The speech is supposed to be as objective as possible. So what I tried to do was just look at some of the good ideas I set forth in my speech of significance and think about how I can expand upon those to better, I guess, delineate the proponent side from the opponent side, and just to kind of show the comparison between those two sides, but more detailed, I guess.
Now, this is a good question. Were you already, did you already have an opinion by the time you sat down and write the
I had an opinion before I did any of this project.
Did anything? So
I had an opinion from the first time I ever heard about House Bill 89.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
It was hard.
So it was a challenge.
It was
to really balance the information.
Yes.
Well, cool. Let's start. Let's go ahead and start with the introduction. Let's take it step by step.
Okay.
And we're going to start with the introduction. And I thought it was interesting how you worded your thesis very tightly, very succinctly. Georgia House Bill 89 is undoubtedly one of the most controversial pieces of legislation passed by the Georgia General Assembly during the 2008 session. Now, that's a thesis statement.
Yep.
And then you go on to break it down into what the pros or what the advocates were saying and then what the opponents are saying. How much time did you spend on getting this thesis, together?
I'm a very verbose person. Everything I say is, wordy because I just love words. I'm addicted to words, I guess you could say. But the point of these speeches is to be very concise, because the liberty that you don't have in a speech that you often have in a paper is just the ability for someone to look at the back on the page if they miss something, go back and reread. Well, they don't have that opportunity if they're your immediate audience and you're giving a speech. So what you have to do is try to be as concise as possible. So probably what you're seeing there is maybe my fifth version of my thesis statement, I would say, on average. Right.
And then you go on to talk about the motivation. And looking at your speech of significance, it's somewhat similar to the motivation that you outlined in your speech of significance. But I guess we see some slight differences, really talking about how House Bill 89, or maybe it's an echo of what you said in this speech of significance.
Yes.
Or how it's really impacting us in the public sphere.
Yes.
On to that level.
Yes, exactly. I would say my motivation, like you said, is very similar. I just began with, now all of us, we ride public transit, we go to restaurants every now and then, and we go to state parks occasionally. Sometimes we get people out of town who come visit, and we take them. So I think just kind of highlighting that public sphere element of this bill and how it's going to change all that every time we set foot outside of our homes. I mean, I don't want to give the impression you're not safe, lock your doors, but I mean, this is the reality. Our public sphere has changed with this bill.
Very good. Now, the body of your speech, you arranged it in three parts.
Yes.
First of all, what is the bill designed to do? That was your first section.
Yes.
And then you went on to talk about the advocates for the bill, why did people support it? And then third of all, what were the opponents saying? Was this arrangement intuitive to you? Did you have to play with different styles? Were there other things that you were thinking about maybe pulling out or putting back in? Or was this pretty much what you thought about at first and what you stuck with?
It's what I tried at first. Doing, well, let's just say that for all these processes, the part about what is the bill, that was the same for all of it. But the part about how to organize what the opponents and proponents of the bill were saying, it was very difficult for me. I began with the division of, here's what proponents say and here's what opponents of House Bill 89 say. And then I just felt that there might be some benefit in juxtaposition and placing those claims side by side for an issue. So like public safety, proponents, opponents, crime, like that. But then I was having a hard time with making wording, like transitions and signposts between those ideas succinct and concise. So then I went back to what I originally done and did advocates of the bill and then opponents of the bill. And that just seemed to work better because I could use signposts like first, second, third. And just get to the point a lot more quickly than I had been.
So I think it seemed to work pretty well. Now, my next question, and this really goes into the meat of your argument, you decided on 3 main issues to really focus on. The first was whether House Bill 89 would enhance public safety. The second one was, does it actually have the power to deter crime, which a lot of people are saying that yes and no. It's a lot of argument about that. And the third of all is the effect of this bill on business owners. Were these 3 issues the 3 that you kept seeing most in your literature, or did you have to pick between maybe 5 or 6 and found that these were the most important? What was the process in deciding on those?
I do think that these 3 were the most present in all of the articles and literature and everything. Right. I mean, crime is obviously an element in our society that we'd all like to be rid of. So, you think about guns and people automatically associate that with crime. I'm not saying that's a good association, but it's something that we naturally do. So I just saw a lot of, quotes in the newspapers and on the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that related to criminal kind of things. Like, like Tim Bearden says, well, if more people are carrying guns, then the criminals won't feel confident enough to just approach anybody because they don't know if they're packing heat. Right. And with public safety, I mean, to me that was just a no-brainer. But I think business owners did kind of come out of the mist with this because I wasn't really sure about how I was going to include that. That was kind of the last thing I added, I would say, the business owners portion.
And do you feel like even though this was the business owner portion was one of the last things you added, do you think that was probably one of the strongest points of contention with the issue, or in your information that you received?
I would say yes, because one of the key, if you think about the proponent side and the opponent side, we know that we've got the NRA behind House Bill 89, okay? Right. Well, I found out through my research that the Georgia Chamber of Commerce actually didn't like the bill at all. They thought it's bad for business, and Atlanta is a huge place of business. I mean, we've got to think about what we're doing for our economy and these sorts of things, and people don't think, politics and economics are interrelated here. So I think that was a good issue to highlight just for the sake of Atlanta's culture as a business place.
Right. Very good. Now, I am interested in how you deliver your speech. You did a very good job, very controlled, very comfortable, and you had us engaged as well. And it seems like students really have an issue with engaging their peers, their audience members, when giving speeches with so much technical information or acquainting them to the topic. So talk a little bit about the preparation as it relates to delivery, really becoming comfortable and remaining humorous at the same time, keeping your sense of humor, keeping your voice during the presentation process.
Well, I would have to say that delivery was so contingent upon the way I crafted my speech and my arrangement, because the diction I chose, I mean, that was my opportunity to, liven things up a little bit or things like that. And it was also kind of also with diction, the attitude I took on certain things. Like when I talk about, hey, by the way, this bill is called the Employee Privacy and Business Security Act, but it's about guns, surprise! Like, I just thought that was a good way to point out the kind of inconsistency in that. But as far as the average stuff like eye contact and things like that, it's something that I'm always reminding myself about, just because the audience is so important and you can't afford to lose that connection as a public speaker, especially when you're trying to get them to understand that this is a serious, stringent issue, this House Bill 89.
So with an informative speech like this one, would you recommend, or like you said, would you recommend for students to think about really making the delivery powerful? Think about your word selection. Think about maybe your rate, your tone, and different aspects to kind of make it pop in certain parts.
I think there definitely are times when and this is one of my problems as a speaker. I talk and I talk and I talk, and sometimes my rate is just out of control, and I need to just bring it back down, tone it down a little bit. So I'm sure that there are some places where I probably rushed when I shouldn't have, but there are some moments like the surprise and things like that, and especially in my closure, I like to just let that last sentence just kind of slow down and settle, and kind of cement itself before I leave the podium.
And let's move on to the conclusion part of the presentation. And I want to talk about the closure, specifically. Many students had a hard time wrapping it all together and not leaving the audience hanging with that's it, I'm done. Tell us a little bit about how you prepared this closure, because you definitely tied us back to the introduction, the attention getter, the issue with DaCosta and Bearden at Hartsville. But what were you thinking when you were preparing this closure? You know, what did you want to leave the audience with it being an informative speech?
It's just as you said, Jasmine. I think looking back to the attention getter is always a good way to bring a sense of closure back, because it reminds your audience, hey, we're back to the first thing we started with, or at least the same theme. You know, I talked about the showdown at Hartsfield, and then here, you know, I said we can at least better understand why these cowboys are bringing the heat.
Right.
So back to that cowboy issue, it brings the theme back into the speech, and it's a nice way to end it that way. So that's why I made that choice. But I definitely think that you can't just make short, succinct, and that's the way it is sentences. You know, I always like to start with something, and though blah, 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 you know, in this sentence, we can at least better understand, so that it feels like I'm kind of wrapping up two issues in one sentence, I guess.
If you were to compare the speech's significance with the informative speech, and it may take you a while to think about it, that's okay.
Okay.
What do you think will be the main difference in those two speeches? You're both, you know, you're giving information, you're acquainting people with the topic, a new topic that some people may or may not know about. What's the main difference that separates the informative speech with the speech of significance?
I guess I would have to say thoroughness, you know, just depth of information. It's not that the nature or the character of these two speeches are innately different. They're essentially the same. We're talking, I mean, I talked about public safety and crime, safety and crime. It's just I added that business owner's element, and I added more evidence, and I, you know, was able to actually say, supporters say this, opponents say this. So just to kind of make it more about, and my first speech is more about the issues, you know, it's more about public safety and crime. And here it's public safety and crime, but I framed it through the lens of, hey, there are these two disputing sides to this argument. So I framed it differently.
Framing it differently.
Frame it differently.
Very good. Ashley, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Your insight has been very helpful.
Thank you.